This story sets in April of 2018. It's not as scary as the other experiences I've read on here, but still quite odd to think about. Before I get into my experience, I'll give you some background information. My grandmother, God bless her soul, resided on the mainland in a rougher area of Vancouver, British Columbia. She had lived there since my dad and her moved to Canada back in 1974, and I'm honestly surprised we didn't move her into a senior's home closer to us than we did, considering the amount of incidences she had gotten herself into during her younger years. In 2017, my grandmother's health had began to weaken at an alarming rate, which led to my dad, her son, bringing her onto the island we lived on, off the coast of the mainland and into a senior care facility. Now, my grandma wasn't always the kindest person when she was alive. Yes, she donated to charities, starving children in underdeveloped countries, and basically tried to make herself seem like a better person with money. But it was a poor attempt to make up for the fact that she was a raging alcoholic who gave my dad a very shitty living situation growing up. One very strong memory I have of her is being on the phone with her and her asking 11-year-old me how much I weighed. I had always been overweight growing up, which was a predecessor of my self-deprecating persona back then. I hung up without a word and started bawling my eyes out on the spot. Truthfully, it astounds me just how much my father cared about her well-being, considering I don't think she ever reciprocated those emotions towards my dad, or anyone else for that matter, when she was still around. I would like to add that although I had known about some of the terrible acts my grandma had committed in her life, watching her slowly deteriorate and her being unable to do a single thing about it made me severely reconsider a lot of my opinions about her. My dad made my brother and I visit her often with him, which at first was a bit of a nuisance, but I grew to understand the importance of it. We were the only family she had left, and was probably extremely grateful my dad even bothered to visit and take her out to places, albeit she wasn't the type to express gratitude. Eventually, my grandma's condition worsened, and she had to be placed into another senior care facility with higher care due to her beginning to lose motor skills and could barely even get into her wheelchair. By this point, we knew it was only a matter of months before she would pass, for it was evident that once you're admitted into a place like that, you're staring straight into the eyes of death. During my final visit, my grandma was basically comatose without being in an actual coma. She couldn't eat, move, her mouth stayed hung open, and could only communicate with how you interpreted the motion of her eyes. I still see her glossy, crystal blue eyes staring into mine, screaming, "I'm still here," without any sounds coming from her mouth besides a small groan here and there. I remember that I told her everything I would have wanted to tell her that night if I knew it would have been the last time I'd see her alive. Like how much I loved and cared for her, and that I hope she wasn't suffering. The next morning, I had to get up earlier than usual due to a school field trip to the Holocaust Memorial Center on the mainland. I was going to hear survivors of the Holocaust recount their stories. Quite the setting, isn't it? Anyways, I had decided to shower before leaving the house since I had forgotten to the night before. I did my usual routine and reached to turn the knob to stop the stream of water. The moment I had turned off the shower, I was hit with an immense wave of some kind of perfume. It was so intense that I could almost feel my nostrils burning from the fumes, and it only lasted for about a good 3 seconds before it had completely evaporated. At first, I thought it was my body wash, but I quickly remembered that it was unscented due to my skin sensitivity. Then, realization settled in after my initial shock. It was my grandmother's perfume. It was a very strong scent that would be common for a woman around her age to wear due to all of your senses, taste, smell, sight, etc., weakening as you age. However, it was definitely my grandmother's perfume. That scent hadn't changed for the majority of the time I'd physically been in the same space as her during my life, and it sent a huge fucking shiver down my spine. I genuinely stood there, naked and motionless, for a good minute before snapping back to reality. Additionally, I had no clue whether or not I was imagining things, since as far as I knew by that point, my grandmother was still alive. Fast forward, I'm in the car with my dad on my way to school. I casually mention what I had experienced in the bathroom, which in return made my father very quiet. Now, my father is not a quiet person in any way. He's the type of person that could talk to you for 20 minutes straight about anything without you saying a single word. This sudden hesitation in a response made me feel unnerved, like I'd struck something within my dad that I shouldn't have. A few more moments had passed before my dad let out a small sigh and said something along the lines of, "I wanted to wait to tell you until you came back from your trip, but your grandmother passed away after we visited her last night." It was my turn to be at a loss of words. I don't remember how I reacted, but I remember thinking later on as to why the hell my grandma had chosen to let me know that she had passed, and wanted to say goodbye while I was completely naked in the shower. Grandma, I truly hope you're doing alright wherever you are, and next time, try catching me when I have my clothes on. Sincerely, your touched but slightly weirded out granddaughter. My family is undoubtedly odd. We have dealt, or at least me and my sisters, have dealt with some weird shit in the past as well as the present. My twin and one of my older sisters has dealt with demons. I've been possessed twice as well, and have had something that occasionally haunts me. We all, for the time being, live in a house haunted by a ghost. Also, to add to all of this, we all have weird abilities. Like, for example, my oldest sister somehow having the ability to get people to do what she wants, and my twin, Glamour, who has the ability to see the future. Well, kind of. It's rare and usually involves death, but nevertheless, she enjoys having it. As for me, I have the ability to soak up the energy around me, like feelings, which in turn allows me to be more in tune with spirits. For the heavier part of this, I am for the most part skeptical on most cases, and definitely look for reasonable possibilities to something happening before I conclude that it might be paranormal. Like, oh, my door just opened on its own. Well, that's because it wasn't fully shut in the first place and windows are open on a windy day. Or that the house is old. 90% of what weird things happen can be coughed up to simple things, but not everything. I think I'll start with my own recent experience. It was Monday night during quarantine, and I was up at about 10 p.m. watching some stupid video about gross content. I was just about to block that content when I heard footsteps in the hallway. I assumed it had to be my dad or one of my siblings using the bathroom that's just around the corner from my room. So I shut off my phone and laid there for a second, listening, hoping not to get caught awake, which is a stupid habit because I'm 20 years old. It's only then that I heard something scratching at the bottom of my door, which is parallel to my bed on the opposite side of the room. I shot up and stared at the door, wide awake, listening at the scratching, mainly because I'm not a dumbass white person who goes snooping around that kind of shit. So I turned on my flashlight and pointed at the 2-inch gap between the floor and the bottom of my door. There used to be a carpet, but it was removed, causing a large gap. The scratching stops as soon as the light touches it. For a second, I watched the door, but decided to go ahead and lay back down. After turning my phone back on to start watching more YouTube is when I heard a moaning sound. I shot up with my flashlight, and the noise stopped. After that, I heard silence for about an hour until I finally fell asleep. The next morning, I talked to some family members about it. My dad thinks it was one of my siblings messing with me. By the way, my parents are skeptical. My mom more so. My mom said it was probably a branch on the window. I could see that, if, the tiny-ass bush outside my window could reach it. My twin said it might be a mouse, but there is no evidence of that. The most likely of these possibilities is the prank, but something seemed off. One being that all of our floors are old wood and are all creaky. But that's how I can hear people walking up and down the hallway from my room. So I'm confused on the fact that during the hour After that, there were no footsteps. Okay, so this happened a couple days ago, but didn't really scare me as much as confuse me. So me and my mom had just gone out and gotten dinner and came back home. She went to the bathroom down the hall, and I saw her walk right behind me. We'd also been getting ready to watch a show, so I was like, hey, you coming or not? A couple minutes go by. She's not in the kitchen or the laundry room, which is right off the kitchen, or the computer room, which is also right off the kitchen so you can see into both. So I thought maybe she went outside and she wasn't there. So I thought maybe she went behind me again and I didn't notice. I asked her when she came back from the restroom, but she said she hadn't. She had been there the whole time. Years ago, I also saw her walk out the back door and walked out after her to find her. Again, she was in the bathroom on the other side of the house. I had a couple experiences in the house, non-recent, but I had some dreams I feel are pre-motionous. I might share more stories if people are interested. This was something my mother told me a few years ago. So my mother and father, when I was around 3 or 4, liked to go around exploring abandoned houses. I have some memory of this as well. Well, this one instance, they took me along and asked me if I wanted to go in as well, and I did. This was until I got out of the car and looked at the house. I immediately started throwing a fit and wanted to not go inside. My mother thought I was just being a bratty. This was also in daytime. Well, I'm still brought along, and the house is explored. Nothing weird, besides some German book in the attic. Well, the coming nights start to get weird for my mom. As cliche as it is, my mom started to wake up at 3 a.m. exactly, with the feeling of pure dread. A little while after, so did my dad. Then my mom started to get bruises out of nowhere. This eventually escalated to my mom being punched in the throat by nothing. When no one was in the bathroom, my dad got slapped. Now our only bathroom is upstairs. At our party, my parents hosted people who were waiting in the line, and people suddenly felt sick. This was only for the upstairs. My mom's best friend saw the fan turn on in my room, the switch as well by itself. I never learned if they ever smelled anything rotten, but people waking up at specific times in the middle of the night, feeling complete dread, sick in specific places, and a terrible smell that moves around are all signs of an evil spirit, or possibly a demon. They ended up getting rid of it by coming into contact with someone that knew what they were doing. I have no memory of these specific events, but they did show me pictures of the abandoned house. They aren't the type to lie, and over the years I've experienced many things. Apparently our family is akin to sensing these types of things. So, this isn't a ghost story, but it was really freaky and it was rather sad. My story begins nearly 2 years ago, about 5 miles off the coast of Ozette, Washington. Me and my dive partner at the time, Jay, were both certified rescue divers with multiple advanced specialties, as well as soon-to-be dive masters through the International PADI program. I should preface, I was 23 years old at the time, while Jay was 24. The spot we chose was known by a few locals as a relatively uncharted piece of reef, along a steep ravine with strong currents and very cold waters. It was also told that there were many semi-cavernous areas that were pristine for incredible underwater photography, all of which sounded incredible to Jay and I. For those divers listening, Jay and I were both certified cavern divers, deepwater divers, and digital underwater photographer divers, so we had a very good idea of what we were doing. After beginning our dive and slowly making our way deeper into the relatively clear water, we came to the point around 40 to 50 meters where, if you don't have the proper enriched oxygen mixture within your air tanks, can result in significant difficulties, such as nitrogen narcosis. Now, narcosis can affect people differently. It can manifest as drunkenness, disorientation, or the worst, panic. Jay and I had been beyond this point of 40 to 50 meters many times before, and had always packed the right air tanks and equipment necessary to have a successful dive. However, this one was different. We had planned to start our ascent when our cookie's air pressure gauges read 500 psi, 300 for going up, 100 to decompress, and another 100 just in case anything happened. Nearly 2 hours in, we began to quickly approach the 500 psi mark, and I went to signal Jay that it was time to go up. We always dive no more than 5 odd meters apart and had underwater audio devices, UADs, to alert each other just in case we needed to get the other person's attention. When I turned to signal Jay, he had somehow drifted downwards nearly 8 to 9 more meters from the last time I checked his position probably 30 seconds ago. I buzzed my UAD to get him to look up at me, but he didn't look up. We were on the edge of a very deep ravine, and Jay and I typically end our dives at the same air pressure, so if I was nearing 500 psi, he was certainly there too. At this point, I was more pissed off than worried. He knew that staying within 5 meters was a must for diving with a partner, and breaking that rule is when bad situations can happen. So after a few more times buzzing, I took out my emergency flashlight. This son of a bitch could shoot a beam a good 30 meters down with ease, so I was certain Jay would be able to see it. But he didn't. He didn't even look up. He didn't even acknowledge me. Now I began to get worried. The beam of light was hitting the back of his head, his hands, and his regulator. I even caught his cookie, which had a little reflector on it. Jay also began to act weird at this point, swimming down hard without controlling his buoyancy for a few moments before freezing and gradually floating back up a few meters. He did this a couple more times before I decided to descend down towards him. I got to around 2 to 3 meters short of Jay before he spun around abruptly with wide eyes, took out his regulator, smiled, waved at me, and began to swim as hard as I've ever seen a human swim straight down into the ravine until I couldn't see him anymore. I was beyond words. I just sat there, looking into the darkness, beside myself, with what the fuck just happened. After a minute, I hesitantly beeped my UAD a few more times, trying to hold out any semblance of hope before slowly beginning my ascent. I hadn't realized that I was panting and managed to suck around 100 psi out of my tank without even realizing it. I knew that what I saw was real, and there was no way in hell I could put my own life in danger going after someone who clearly was going to die, if not dead already, with such little air. It's an unspoken rule that this is what you do in these situations. Upon safely resurfacing, I immediately started towards the boat, in a panic, of course, after the severity of the situation hit me. Long story short, Jay hadn't packed the right oxygen tank, and had experienced a severely delayed narcosis episode, and resulted in him just answering the call to the abyss. I was really close with him, and I ended up having to run through hoops with the police and other investigators during the investigation of his death. They never claimed I murdered him, but they implied it multiple times during my interviews. But following the retrieval and subsequent autopsy of his body, it was shown that the cause of death was directly linked to massive nitrogen toxicity. I've recounted the story many times, yet the nightmares still come. And one question I'll always have is, what was going through his mind when he took out his regulator and descended to the depths? Hey guys, Gote here. Thank you so much for listening to this video. I really appreciate it, and the subscriber count is going up, which is really good news. So I'm sorry if a few of these stories were kind of heartbreaking. The last one was really heartbreaking for me because I actually know someone that had something very similar happen to their father's friend, I think. But yeah, thank you again so much for listening. Have a good quarantine day, and I will see you mates in the next episode.